Players in China's ride-hailing service market are joining forces after a brutal cash-burning competition to win over the Chinese market. U.S. giant Uber has sold its China operations to rival Didi Chuxing, but it might not be an easy ride for now. Customers are concerned about potentially increasing charges, and the country's antitrust regulator is keeping an eye out for its monopoly status in the industry. Plus, new rules legalizing ride-hailing services were just issued before the merger. So what is on the road ahead for Didi and the whole industry?
From rivals to teammates, Didi Chuxing and Uber China announced their merger on Monday. Uber sold its China's operation to Didi in exchange for a 17.7% economic interest in the new company.
Of all the companies we've competed with, that Didi is certainly the most impressive, the most competitive, probably the fiercest rival that we've ever come up against. They've made us better by having to compete with them, but I'd much rather be working with them.
This deal will eliminate the cutthroat competition between Didi and Uber China. Both companies are known to hand out subsidies to drivers and consumers in a bid to grab the market. In a blog post, co-founder and CEO of Uber Technologies Travis Kalanick said, "Getting to profitability is the only way to build a sustainable business that can best serve Chinese riders, drivers, and the cities over the long term." The merger between two leading ride-hailing services companies in China has raised concerns. Without the fight for a market, customers worry about increased charges that will come after the merger. And with Didi soon holding more than 90% of the market, there are wide concerns of the market being dominated by a single big player.
Why did they burn so much money to compete with other firms? Because Didi wants to become a monopoly. Look at all those smaller firms we had before. They are already driven out of market.
China's Ministry of Commerce has not ruled out the possibility of an anti-monopoly investigation.
The Ministry of Commerce hasn't received any files from Didi and Uber yet. According to the regulation and antitrust law, companies need to declare such deals to the Ministry of Commerce. Those who don't declare could not conduct such deals.
And just days before this merger, the Chinese government gave the green light to online ride-hailing services and issued guidelines to establish a long-awaited framework for this booming industry. These rules will promote the industry's development and regulate participant behavior. With the road to a more standardized ride-hailing market becoming more stable and developed, the marriage between these two giants doesn't seem that terrifying anymore.
To discuss the merger, as well as China's ride-hailing market, joining us in the Beijing studio, we're having Dr. Anil Gupta, the Michael Dingman Chair of Strategy and Globalization at the University of Maryland Smith School of Business. Professor Gupta is also a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Emerging Multinationals. Welcome to our program. Meanwhile, joining us in Beijing, Andy Mok, founder of Red Pagoda Resources, which provides professional services for startups in China. And also joining us from New York, we are having Professor Max Wolf, Professor of Economics from the New School University. Welcome as well. So, may I begin with the Beijing studio by asking the two of you, do you think it is a good deal? And who is really enjoying this good deal? Professor Gupta.
I think it's that depends very much from whose perspective we
That's right.
look, right?
What about from your perspective?
So I think, if I look at from perspective of the two companies, Didi as well as Uber China and their investors, I think it's definitely a good deal because, they were engaging in nuclear warfare with each other, burning down billions of dollars, and their investors were getting seriously concerned. So I think that competition essentially vanishes. For Chinese consumers, naturally, making that competition go away is probably not a very good thing. So I think we have to look at it from these two different perspectives and probably different conclusions.
As you said, Professor, the two giants, Uber and Didi, have been spending a lot of cash, in fact, for subsidies in order to compete in the Chinese market. Take a look at what we have got over here. Media reports say in the past year, Didi spent at least $70 million US every week, amounting to about 3 $0.6 billion a year, and Uber China in turn spent a total of $1 billion last year in just trying to battle Didi. Of course, eventually there's a merger over there. So, Mr. Ma, is this merger a good news in terms of seeing the potential of platforms like taxi hailing services like Didi or even Uber?
I think it absolutely is a good thing. So for Uber, it's perhaps winning with Chinese characteristics in that while they did not dominate the market the way they set out to, they have a meaningful share in the largest ODM, on-demand mobility company in China. When we look at it from a consumer perspective, while I think there is a risk of monopoly and that, all that entails in terms of losses for consumers, but now at least potentially Chinese consumers that use Didi can travel overseas, have a seamless experience with an Uber Didi tie-up. For consumers coming to China, whether for business or travel as well, they now then can have a service as part of the Uber platform.
Right. But what about from your perspective, Professor Wolf? It seems that the old-day rivals have become partners. And yet, they're not really partners because they're still battling one another in other markets.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. It looks like Uber has admitted what was very clear for a long time, which is that it's failed to make any meaningful inroad in China. It's also admitted that it's spending an enormous amount of money and probably bandwidth intellectually. Now, some of that was reduced by separating Uber China into a separate operation from Uber Global, but still $1 billion+ a year in losses. And so far, Uber is very good at raising money and even better at spending it very quickly. And so they probably do need to reconcile that. And this is one way to do it. And they were paid a lot of money to fail gracefully here. So the irony is owning 17.7% of Didi, which they propose to do going forward, actually equates to a much larger market share than they ever earned in the competitive market. It's almost twice. Right? So with about 90% market share for Didi, and they have about 18% of that, they end up with a lot more probable chance for opportunity for profit and appreciation of asset than they had spending a lot of money as Uber. That being said, they will fight each other. They are already fighting each other, by the way, in Southeast Asia, which is a lucrative market, and they will probably bump into each other around the world in many locations as competitors, not allies.
That's very true, isn't it, Professor Gupta, that they're already fighting against one another in other markets. In the U.S., there's a Lyft, of course, Uber is fighting against that, but it seems that there is a anti-Uber alliance around the world in which Didi plays a big role, evermore, and also in Southeast Asia. It is investing $1 billion into Grab, which is a big thing, $600 million rather, together with SoftBank into Grab, which is a big thing. So what do you make of this ever-entangled relationship, shall I say?
I think right now it's a little bit of a spaghetti, and I think that spaghetti will need to be straightened out over the coming 2-3 years, because there has been the formation over the last 2-3 years of a global alliance against Uber. So that is Lyft in US, of course Didi in China, Ola in India, Grab in Southeast Asia, and the formation of this anti-Uber alliance made a lot of sense. But now you throw into that basket the merger of Uber China with Didi and Uber owning 20% of Didi. So now you are making it somewhat complicated. And I think, it's there's certainly news that Lyft, for example, has hired investment bankers, might be looking to sell itself. And so now whether it is Didi who is a buyer or Uber who is a buyer, so that's going to create some more complications.
All right, it is already very complicated. So let's try to calm through and use a spoon to help with the problem here. First thing we need to really understand is whether this deal could really become a reality. Because we talk about it, only because the two companies talk about it. And yet, the authorities has not yet proved it, with the danger of monopoly. So, from your perspective, Mr. Mark, what about the possibility of being recognized as monopoly, this merger, eventually final product?
Sure. Well, I think, government is looking to protect the interest of consumers while also balancing the need for businesses to make a profit.
Well, it's believed to be the case, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, if we look at it that way, is a monopoly necessarily a bad thing? It may not be, because when we look at, say, utilities, telecommunications companies that have operated as monopolies at points in the past, as long as they're effectively regulated, they can still deliver consumer value. I think the more important question is how will regulation cover this new business, because the Chinese government has said that we recognize this new on-demand mobility market as a new industry.
I guess, Mr. Mark, whether this will be termed as monopoly is already a process that we can try to use to figure out exactly whether regulations really cover this area and how is it really covering this area, because nobody has done that before. So, Professor Wolf, what do you think? Monopoly or not? Monopoly is good, as Mr. Mark earlier argued, or not definitely?
So monopolies have a tendency to underserve and overcharge. Not always, not necessarily. We have a sort of suspension of that rule generally when we believe there's a universal economy of scale or limitless return to size, and so that it's so much better to be larger and so much more advantageous that the natural inclination to overcharge and underdeliver that comes with monopolies is offset by the infinitely greater profitability. I think in these cases, however, which are less textbook and more nitty-gritty, the real final decision always comes down to what we define the market as. So China has many quite monopolistic local taxi cab companies that Uber and Didi have been fighting. If you define the market as all subways, all cabs, all buses, and Didi, then they're by no means a monopoly. If you define the market as only ride sharing, then they had 90% before, a near monopoly. They're going to move to 95% with the acquisition of Uber China and be a straight up monopoly, and at that point you would almost have to intervene in the market or just basically allow yourself to rubber stamp a quasi-state sanctioned market dominant firm.
Right. This is a very interesting question, Professor Wolf, you just raised, because it brings our debate to another layer. That is, what is the nature of these taxi hailing apps? What exactly are they going to transcend? How are we going to see its future? How is it being compared to traditional industry like taxi companies, like the subway companies? So, Professor Gupta, once again come to you. Monopoly or not, from which angle should we understand this, and what would this precedence mean for us?
Yeah, I think, from my point of view, the chances are very high that this will be really looked as a monopoly within the ride-sharing industry. And the reason for that is because the taxi industry is essentially dying. It is not dead yet, but you can see where the future is headed. And, the ride-sharing, indirectly it competes with buses and subways and the like, but that competition is rather thin. And so it's really within the ride-sharing industry. So in that sense, if, for example, in India, if Uber and Ola wanted to merge, in US, if Uber and Lyft wanted to merge, antitrust authorities will clearly look at this question. My sense also is that the same in China. Now, but given the investors that are behind one or both of these companies, we are talking about Tencent and Alibaba and Baidu, is that, those investors have clearly been a party and major players in the discussions, to say the least. And I would be absolutely shocked. Clearly, I have no private information at all, but I would be shocked if the investors, particularly investors based in China, prominent ones, have not already informally, if you will, got some sense from the Ministry of Commerce about is it likely to be blessed or not.
Well, we have heard very clearly from the spokesperson from the Ministry of Commerce suggesting after a press conference very clearly that the applications has not been filed by the companies who are looking for a merger. And according to him, it is a must. So we'll see how it goes from here.
Exactly.
Having said that, though, Mr. Mark, the nature of this tax hailing apps and its potential, how is it going to transcend industries, it's a bigger topic, even goes beyond just this merger case. But that is the most important and ultimate question we need to ask here. We talk about it's going to transcend all boundaries, but will it really? Without traditional taxi companies, traditional bus companies, subway companies, will this taxi app or hailing app still going to serve its function?
Well, I think it absolutely already is, because we look at it as an Internet Plus application or O2O, online, offline in China. It's already changed, disrupted consumer behavior. It's changed driver behavior. So in that respect, it's hard to imagine that there will not be a regulatory response to this, whether it's to block the transaction because it hasn't been properly approved, because it is a monopoly, or some other way of making sure that these multiple interests are being balanced. But I think clearly on-demand mobility, being able to go where you want, when you want, through the modality of transportation that is best for you, is an enormous area that is being changed.
It is an enormous area. The people, why they like it, at least in China, with Didi and also with Uber, is because it is cheaper, because they're providing the subsidies when they were competing against one another. And now without the competition, whether a merger, will they still enjoy what you have just said, the big benefits? Professor Wolf, really, what is the potential that we are talking about with this industry?
Yeah, so the potential is going to depend a bit on regulation. The other sort of thing we haven't discussed we should mention is that the modern era of the rise of Uber and Lyft and Didi and all these car hailing companies have been an era in which labor was very weak in most jurisdictions and gas was very cheap. And if you start to normalize gas price expectations and labor expectations from drivers, what you see is that it's going to be impossible for them to offer these services at anywhere near the prices they have been offering them. Double down on that when you remove the driver bonuses, which make it more exciting for people to do a job that doesn't pay that well, and the subsidies on the rides because of competition. So my guess is that the total market is a little bit smaller than folks think. There's a novelty factor, and it's been artificially cheapened by competition. That being said, I do think that ride-hailing apps are a major way people will get around in the future, and my guess is we'll see an amended Uber China Didi deal, but we'll see a deal go through.
Having asked those, I have to ask even a further question, Professor Gupta. Many of you travel around the world. You've used all kinds of taxi-hailing apps around the world. And now, with this merger, with further Chinese Didi going global, we're seeing an even more fluid picture among these companies.
Yes.
So are we going to see one after another huge-scale mergers like this? Are we going to see companies stick to now their very original market, or go all the way out in order to make a point?
I think here, if we look at for instance, Uber, or ride-hailing, ride-sharing apps, that this has both a technology component and, of course, a non-technology component. Well, by non-technology, I mean cars and drivers and passengers and the like. And, of course, technology is the platform. And the thing about that platform is that, by and large, that platform is global. So the way I see is that cross-border mergers are likely to be very much that what we should expect to see. I would not expect to see the emergence of local monopolies or within-country monopolies. So in that sense, the Didi Uber China is a very interesting story playing out, and we have to see what happens. Is because unlike, for instance, electricity, is that ride-sharing is not what I would call a natural monopoly, And so you don't want two sets of electric cables going down the street. But that kind of a duplication is not costly within the ride-sharing industry. So in that sense, we are likely to see more like the emergence of perhaps two global networks. And it may very well be that the emergence of that two global networks leads at some point Uber to sell its stake, divest its stake in Didi, so that Uber and Didi go their own separate ways.
Right.
And Uber creates one global network and Didi creates another global network.
Wow, that's a grand picture you're talking about here, Professor. We'll see whether your prediction is correct or not. But what about yours, Professor Wolf?
Yeah, I mean, my guess is that we will see some national champions emerge. I think Ola in India is probably watching Didi very closely. I think markets are quite different, and what we saw with Uber was a very American, very brash, very youthful approach to always ask for forgiveness, never ask for permission, and that if you spend enough money and you advertise enough, you can succeed. And while that sometimes works in America, I guess we'll see in November where it doesn't work, but it sometimes works in America, but it doesn't work everywhere. So I do think we're going to see different businesses catering to different local cultures. That being said, there are likely to be some global networks because there are network effects in this area where size has a positive incremental return to it. So I would agree with that.
And before we go, another interesting layer of this traditional company, they're already become a traditional company like Apple, who are well known for its smartphones, now are investing in this taxi hailing apps. 1B, of course, into Didi. It's not big money, but people are asking, will this in a way also make them to switch their directions for the future? Mr. Mark, very briefly from you, and then we are going to end up with the answers from the other two guests.
Sure. Well, I think it's an example of maybe Chinese-style capitalism where there's a lot of co-opetition in that Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent compete with each other. They have their proxies that compete and also cooperate with each other. And now I think companies like Apple and Uber are being pulled into this ecosystem.
Really? Business environment with Chinese characteristics all over the world? Professor Wolf?
Yeah, so I think what we've seen here is that the ultimate operating platform is the operating system, and that means that Google and Apple are front and center on most every technology play. We think that the car companies themselves, which have begun to invest, are the big player that's coming. I think you're going to see Mercedes, BMW, Ford, GM take a much bigger role in this business in the future.
All right. Yeah. Professor Gupta, everybody is in everybody else field?
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, so far we have talked about this in the context of ride sharing, but actually what's coming down the pike over the next 5 years, 100% over the next 10 years, but perhaps over the next 5 years, is actually it becomes logistic services, and so that it's no longer about transport of passengers, number one, and number two is driverless cars. So Uber is investing, for instance, massively in that domain.
We are all looking forward to the future, which is getting ever more exciting. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Anil Gupta, Andy Mark, and Max Wolf. Thank you so much.